When we gather in the quiet of this space, there is already a silent drama unfolding between us, for each of you carries within your chest the echo of 1,000 invisible wars. And tonight, as I speak, I invite you to look with unflinching eyes at one of the most profound struggles of the human soul, the ancient dance between the empath and the narcissist. This encounter is not merely psychological, not simply a matter of interpersonal wounds. It is archetypal. It is the collision of two patterns that rise from the depths of the collective unconscious. The empath, who bleeds with the sorrows of the world, and the narcissist, who hungers for the reflection of their own distorted image to mirror one another in ways few dare to confront. The question I pose is not about how to escape this tension, but rather what happens when the empath, long chained in submission, transforms the game of the narcissist into the pathway of their own freedom. Such a reversal is not only possible, it is inevitable once consciousness awakens. And in the very moment when awareness shines its light into the shadows of domination, exploitation, and fear, the empath ceases to be prey. The empath becomes a mirror, so polished, so radiant, that the narcissist can no longer feed without being forced to see themselves. And this, my friends, is where liberation begins. You must understand that every empath has in their depths a hidden shadow. The empath's tenderness, their compassion, their capacity to suffer with others arises not from pure divinity alone, but from wounds etched into the soul, often in childhood, often in moments when love was conditional and survival meant absorbing the moods, the fears, the despair of those around them. The empath learned to carry what was not theirs. They became the vessel of the unspoken, the container of another's chaos, and in doing so, they developed a gift, but also a curse. The inability to distinguish between their own pain and the pain of the other. The narcissist too carries a wound, but theirs is wrapped in armor, whereas the empath dissolved into others to preserve love. The narcissist collapsed into themselves to preserve survival. They built a mask, a false self, a grand image, not because they were evil, but because they were afraid that without it, they would vanish into insignificance. The tragedy is that they hunger for the very intimacy they cannot tolerate, while the empath yearns for the very recognition that the narcissist cannot give, and thus, like moth and flame, they are drawn together. But imagine the moment, the sacred turning point, when the empath awakens to this pattern. At first it comes like a whisper, uneasy recognition. This is not mine. This anger, this projection, this manipulation, it is not mine to carry. Such awareness is revolutionary, for it begins to dismantle the archetypal spell. You see, the empath's prison has never been the narcissist. The prison has always been the empath's identification with the suffering of others as their own. The bars are built of misplaced responsibility, the chains forged of guilt. To turn the narcissist's game into freedom is to refuse to play by the rules of unconsciousness. The narcissist thrives on reaction, on your guilt, your shame, your confusion. They throw the bait of accusation and you bite because you feel compelled to prove your goodness. But the awakened empath no longer bites. They stand still. Like a mirror, that refuses distortion. They say, perhaps without words, I see your pain, but I will not carry it for you. I will not rescue you from the emptiness you fear, nor will I collapse into it myself. In that refusal, in that sacred boundary, the empath begins to taste freedom. Consider the archetype of the mirror. In mythology, mirrors are often instruments of truth and terror. Perseus used the polished shield to confront Medusa without being turned to stone. In much the same way, the empath learns to hold the mirror not to absorb the poison gaze of the narcissist, but to reflect it back, forcing the monster to see itself. Do you see the paradox? The empath does not destroy the narcissist. They simply refuse to become the food that sustains illusion. And yet, the transformation is not easy. It requires that the empath face their own shadow, the part of themselves that clings to victimhood, that secretly believes, if I can suffer enough, I will be loved. This belief must die. It must be offered as a sacrifice on the altar of individuation. For true empathy, like true love, does not arise from martyrdom, it arises from wholeness. Only the soul that has embraced both its darkness and its light can stand in compassion without collapsing. I tell you this, many of you in this room have lived your lives bending under the weight of others' expectations, taking on responsibilities that were never yours, because you feared abandonment, because you feared rejection, and in doing so, you became the ideal prey for those who thrive on control. But now, I invite you to turn as the seasons turn, as the tide turns, as the stars in their courses turn, to turn your gaze inward and see that the freedom you long for has always been there, waiting in the silent space where you no longer confuse your worth with another's approval. Freedom for the empath is not the absence of connection. It is the rebirth of authentic connection, where you no longer dissolve into the other, but stand as a whole person, rooted in the soil of your own being. And when you stand thus, even the narcissist cannot bind you, for you have ceased to supply the very energy upon which their illusion feeds. You become like the dreamer who realizes they are dreaming, and in that moment, the nightmare loses its power. Dreams often reveal this dynamic before consciousness does. How many of you have dreamt of being chased, of being swallowed, of losing your voice? These dreams are not random. They are symbols of the empath's entanglement with forces that demand their energy. But notice what happens when, in the dream, the dreamer turns around, faces the pursuer, and says, "Enough." Suddenly the chase dissolves. The monster shrinks. The dream changes. So too in life, when the empath turns not away from the narcissist, but toward themselves, they awaken from the spell. And let us not imagine that this awakening is purely personal. It is deeply collective, for the empath and the narcissist are not merely individuals, they are archetypal figures that have danced through history, through families, through cultures, empires, can be narcissistic, demanding devotion, exploiting the sensitive, feeding on the vitality of the masses. And the awakening of the empath is, in truth, the awakening of humanity to its own power its own sovereignty, its own capacity to say, we will no longer play the game of domination, we will turn it into the path of freedom. But I must caution you, when the empath first claims freedom, there is often loneliness, for the ties that once bound them will resist. The narcissist may rage, may accuse, may paint them as cruel, ungrateful, or mad, and the empath, unused to the solidity of their own no, may tremble. But this trembling is the birth pang of the soul. It is the shudder of the cocoon splitting open to reveal wings. You must endure this loneliness, for it is not the loneliness of exile, but the loneliness of transformation. In that silence, in that threshold, you begin to discover what true empathy is. It is not the act of losing yourself in another's suffering. It is the radiance of a soul that has embraced its own suffering, integrated its own shadow, and now stands as a light, not a candle, burning itself out for others, but a sun that shines because it cannot do otherwise. And this light, paradoxically, is what the narcissist fears and longs for. They may try to extinguish it, but in the end, they must either confront themselves in its brilliance or retreat into the hollows of their illusions. So, my friends, the question I leave with you in this first turning of the spiral is this: are you willing to see that the game has always been yours to transform? That the chains you wore were made of beliefs, not iron? That the moment you choose to no longer carry what is not yours, you have already stepped into freedom? This is not an idea, it is a lived reality, and if you dare to embody it, you will discover that the empath, far from being the eternal victim, is the hidden alchemist of the soul. You must come to see that what binds the empath to the narcissist is not a chain forged outside, but a secret magnetism within. This magnetism is born of archetypes that seek one another in the unconscious, as if reenacting a myth as old as humanity itself. The empath is often caught in the archetype of the savior, longing to redeem the broken. The narcissist embodies the archetype of the wounded child, disguised as the tyrant. When these two meet, they ignite a drama of projection. The empath projects their need to heal. The narcissist projects their need to dominate, but both are captives of their own shadows, and neither sees the true face of the other until consciousness dawns. The empath's turning point is when they withdraw these projections. Imagine for a moment the myth of Orpheus descending into the underworld to rescue Eurydice. Orpheus loses her because he cannot resist looking back. In the same way, the empath loses themselves when they keep looking back to the narcissist for validation. But what if Orpheus had not looked back? What if he had trusted the path of ascent without needing proof? That is the path of the empath's liberation. When you walk out of the underworld of entanglement without looking back for approval, you bring your soul into the light. The narcissist's game is control through reflection. They need you to act as a mirror that confirms their existence. They provoke, they gaslight, they charm, they wound, all in order to pull from you the reaction that says, yes, you are real, you are powerful. But when you stop playing, when you no longer flinch, no longer defend, no longer offer yourself as a vessel of their story, the mirror cracks. They are confronted with emptiness, and though they may rage, though they may grasp desperately, you have already won, because you have ceased to give them what they cannot generate for themselves. Let us enter the symbolic language of dreams once more. Imagine you dream of being in a room filled with distorted mirrors, each one elongating, shrinking, twisting your reflection. At first, you panic, wondering if you are truly grotesque, if your essence is warped beyond repair. But then you find one small mirror at the edge of the room clear, still, undistorted. When you stand before it, you see yourself as you are. This mirror is your own awakened consciousness. It reveals to you that the twisted reflections were never you, they were projections. And when you know this, you are no longer trapped in the hall of mirrors. You step out a whole. The freedom of the empath is not cold detachment, nor is it vengeance. It is an alchemical transformation in which suffering becomes wisdom. Just as lead can be transmuted into gold in the alchemist's vision, the empath's pain is transmuted into sovereignty. This requires a descent into the unconscious, a facing of fears. You must confront the part of yourself that believed you were only valuable if you carried the pain of others. You must look at the inner child who whispered, "If I give enough, they will not leave me." And you must take that child into your arms, saying, "You are enough," even if no one else sees it. This self-embrace is the ultimate act of individuation. For individuation is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming whole. And wholeness includes the parts of you that once made you vulnerable. They do not disappear. They are integrated. And once integrated, they no longer control you from the shadows. You become the master of your own inner kingdom. There is a mystical paradox here. The empath's greatest fear has always been abandonment. But when the empath turns the narcissist game into freedom, they willingly risk abandonment. They stand in their truth, even if it means losing the bond. And it is precisely in this willingness to be alone that they discover they are not abandoned at all. For the self, the deep center of the psyche, rises to meet them. It fills the void with a presence that is eternal, a presence that cannot be taken away. Listen to me closely. The narcissist cannot truly be defeated, because the narcissist is not only outside of you, it is within you too. Each of us carries a seed of narcissism, just as each of us carries the potential for empathy. To demonize the narcissist entirely is to split off part of your own shadow. The task is not to destroy the narcissist, but to integrate the archetypal energy that they represent within yourself. What is that energy? It is the will to assert, the desire to be seen, the hunger for recognition. These are not evil in themselves. They become destructive only when they are severed from empathy. When they dominate instead of participate. By recognizing the narcissist within, you rob the external narcissist of their power over you. In this way, the empath who awakens is no longer prey, but neither do they become predator. They transcend the duality. They become something new, something whole. And this is why I say the empath, when conscious, is the hidden alchemist of the soul. They can take what was meant to enslave them and turn it into the very key that unlocks their freedom. The collective unconscious is full of stories where the weak outwit the strong, not by brute force, but by turning the game inside out. Consider the trickster archetype. Loki in Norse myth, Hermes in Greek myth, Coyote among the Native American traditions. The trickster survives by refusing to play the game as it is presented. They bend the rules, reveal hidden truths, expose the absurdity of power. The empath, when awakened, carries the spirit of the trickster. They no longer play the narcissist's game of dominance and submission. They reveal the emptiness of the game itself. And in doing so, they are free. But this freedom carries responsibility, for once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you awaken, you cannot return to unconsciousness. You will feel the temptation, yes, to fall back into old patterns, to silence yourself for peace, to carry another's burden, to feel needed. But each time, the voice within will remind you, this is not yours. This is not who you are. And the more you listen to this voice, the stronger it becomes, until it is no longer a whisper, but a song. And then something remarkable happens. You begin to attract different energies. The old dynamics fall away, for they can no longer hook you. People who thrive on manipulation lose interest in you because you do not feed their hunger, and those who resonate with authenticity draw near, for they feel your light. In this way, your very being becomes a filter, sorting the real from the false. You no longer need to fight. You simply are. So I ask you, what would it mean for your life if you ceased to carry what was never yours? What doors would open if you no longer gave your energy to those who exploit it? What would you create with the vitality that returns to you? This is not a small matter. It is a revolution of the soul, and the ripple effects spread far beyond you. For every empath who awakens, the collective psyche heals a little more. The narcissist game is built on illusion. Your freedom is built on truth, and truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. It is the light that pierces the shadows, the dawn that no darkness can prevent. And though the narcissist may rail against it, though they may try to drag you back into the hall of mirrors, you will know you are free. There is an image that comes to me often when I contemplate the struggle of the empath with the narcissist. It is the image of a moth circling a flame. The moth is drawn by light, by warmth, by an irresistible call. Yet the very fire that attracts it can also consume it. So too does the empath circle the flame of the narcissist's charisma, their intensity, their demand for recognition. The empath feels needed, feels alive, feels important, until they discover that they are being scorched. And the lesson is not to deny the flame, nor to despise the longing for light, but to realize that one carries within oneself the fire that one was seeking outside. The narcissist's game works only so long as the empath believes their light is external, something to be mirrored, validated, or confirmed by another. But once the empath realizes that their own inner flame is eternal, the narcissist's allure fades. This is not a rejection of love, but a reorientation of it. You begin to love from fullness, not from hunger. And love from fullness cannot be manipulated, for it does not cling, does not beg, does not need permission to exist. Consider the archetype of the alchemist's vessel. In the old texts, the vessel was set to hold the transformation of lead into gold, but the secret, which the mystics always knew, is that the vessel is the soul itself. The empath has long acted as a vessel for the narcissist, containing their rage, their emptiness, their projections. Yet when the empath awakens, they reclaim the vessel. They say, "No longer shall my soul be the container for another's poison. My vessel is sacred. It is meant for the alchemy of my own becoming." And in this act, they seal their boundaries with gold. Do not mistake this for selfishness. It is not selfish to refuse to carry another's shadow. It is, in fact, an act of deep love, for only when you carry your own shadow can you truly meet another as an equal. Otherwise, you live in distortion, a martyrdom that masquerades as love but is really fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being unloved, fear of being unworthy. The narcissist's game thrives on this fear, but when fear is faced, the game collapses. Let me speak to you now in the language of dreams. A patient once told me a dream of walking through a house with endless rooms, each filled with people demanding something of her. In one room, a man shouted. In another, a woman wept. In another, a child begged. She moved from room to room, trying to satisfy them until she collapsed. Then, in the dream, she noticed one door that had always been closed. Trembling, she opened it. Inside was silence, a simple chair, and a mirror. She sat, looked into the mirror, and for the first time saw her own face, not distorted, not masked, but her true face. When she awoke, she wept, for she realized that all her life she had been wandering the rooms of others, forgetting the room of her own being. This is the dream of the empath, and opening that door is the beginning of freedom. You may ask, why does the empath attract the narcissist so often? It is because opposites draw one another in the unconscious. The empath, who cannot bear to see themselves, is drawn to the narcissist, who refuses to see anyone but themselves. They are mirrors of avoidance. One avoids self by disappearing into the other. The other avoids self by inflating the mask. The attraction is not love. It is an unconscious attempt at healing, but healing cannot occur in unconsciousness. Healing requires awareness, confrontation, transformation. When the empath awakens, they do not abandon love, but they redefine it. Love ceases to mean rescuing, fixing, or dissolving. Love becomes the courage to stand whole, to say no when no is true, to say yes only when it rises from authenticity. And paradoxically, in this kind of love, the narcissist is also given a gift, the chance, perhaps, to see themselves clearly. Many will refuse, retreating deeper into their illusions, but some, confronted by the mirror of a conscious empath, may begin their own descent into the shadow. And thus, even the narcissist may be called toward freedom. We must not forget that the narcissist's tyranny is a defense against unbearable emptiness. It is the cry of the child who once felt unseen, unheard, unloved. The empath recognizes this because they too once felt it. But they chose a different survival strategy. To despise the narcissist entirely is to despise the wounded child in all of us. And yet, to tolerate abuse is to betray one's own soul. The middle path is compassion with boundaries, understanding without enslavement. This is not easy. It requires constant vigilance, constant self-examination, constant courage. In the great myths, the hero often must pass through trials that test their very identity. The empath trial is to say, I am not what you project onto me. I am not your savior, nor your enemy. I am myself. This declaration is more powerful than any sword. It is the word that cuts the cords of manipulation, the truth that shatters illusions, and like all true words, it is creative. It creates a new reality in which the empath is no longer a victim but sovereign. There's one more danger I must name. When the empath awakens, there is a temptation to swing to the opposite extreme, to harden into coldness, to mirror the narcissist's armor. But this is not true freedom. It is only another mask. True freedom is softer. Paradoxically, it is the softness of water that wears down stone, the softness of light that reveals what darkness hides. The empath's gift remains empathy, but now it flows from wholeness, not from self-erasure. They can feel with others without losing themselves, suffer with others without drowning. Their empathy becomes choice, not compulsion. And this is the mark of transformation. Compulsion becomes choice. What you once did unconsciously, you now do consciously. What once bound you in shadow, you now wield as light. This is the alchemy of individuation. And it is the greatest liberation a soul can know. So I say to you, do not fear the narcissist. Fear only your own forgetting. For if you remember who you are, if you claim your own soul as sacred vessel, no game can bind you. You may encounter narcissists still, as we all do, but you will not be ensnared. You will stand, you will see, you will choose, and that, my friends, is freedom. Freedom does not arrive as a sudden lightning bolt that ends all suffering forever. It arrives in waves, like the tide, retreating and advancing, testing your resolve. The empath who has awakened will still feel the pull of old patterns, the longing for approval, the ache to be needed. But each time these waves rise, you will have the chance to choose differently. And each choice strengthens the soul until the old pattern no longer defines you. This is the slow work of individuation. It is not glamorous, but it is holy. The narcissist's game thrives on illusion, but your liberation thrives on truth. And truth is not merely intellectual, it is embodied. You will feel it in your spine when you say no without guilt. You will feel it in your breath when you refuse to explain your worth. You will feel it in your chest when you realize that love does not require you to shrink. This is not theory. This is the lived body of freedom. There is a story told in many traditions of the phoenix that burns only to rise again from its own ashes. The empath's liberation is such a death and rebirth. You must allow the old self, the self who survived by pleasing, by carrying, by dissolving, to die. There will be grief in this death, for that self was loyal. That self kept you alive. Honor it, but let it go. And from its ashes rises the true self, radiant, whole, indestructible. This rebirth is not the end of empathy, but its purification. You emerge not as a fragile flame, but as fire itself, self-sustaining. And I tell you this with certainty. Once you have tasted this fire, you will never again mistake the narcissist's demand for a true connection. You will see through the mask, through the manipulation, through the glittering illusion. You will see the wound beneath the armor, and you will know it is not yours to heal. You may feel compassion, yes, but you will not be consumed. You will stand as witness, not as sacrifice. And this, paradoxically, is the greatest gift you can offer, to hold the mirror steady without losing yourself in its reflection. Do not imagine, however, that the world will applaud your freedom. Many will be disturbed by it. For an awakened empath unsettles the unconscious games of others. You may be called selfish, cold, arrogant. You may lose relationships that once defined you, but do not despair. For what you lose in illusion, you gain in truth. And the relationships that remain or that are born anew will be of a different kind, deeper, more authentic, rooted in mutual respect rather than hidden exploitation. This is the deeper mystery. Your personal liberation participates in the healing of the collective unconscious. Every time you refuse to play the game of domination, you weaken its hold on humanity. Every time you embody authentic empathy, you add light to the collective shadow. Do not underestimate the ripple of your awakening. It extends far beyond what you can see. Now let me speak of shadow, for no liberation is complete without its embrace. The empath's shadow is the hunger to be indispensable, the pride in suffering, the hidden resentment that grows when sacrifice is unrecognized. The narcissist's shadow is the terror of insignificance, the hidden shame beneath a mask of grandeur. When the empath awakens, they must face their shadow honestly. They must admit, yes, part of me wanted to be needed so badly that I allowed myself to be used. Part of me feared abandonment so deeply that I gave away my soul. This honesty is painful, but it is also freeing, for once named, the shadow loses its power to control you in secret. The narcissist rarely faces their shadow, for their defenses are strong, but if ever they do, it is often through the mirror of an awakened empath, an empath who refuses to collude with illusion, who stands firm, who shines light. This possibility exists, though it is not your responsibility to make it happen. Your task is only your own individuation. The rest belongs to fate, to the deeper workings of the psyche, to the mystery of life itself. So, my friends, what happens when the empath turns the narcissist game into freedom? What happens is nothing less than alchemy. Lead becomes gold, shadow becomes light, victim becomes sovereign. What was once a cycle of suffering becomes a path of awakening. And though the narcissist may remain bound in their illusions, the empath rises, no longer as prey, but as creator. Imagine, then a new dream. In this dream, you walk into the Hall of Mirrors once more, but this time You carry a lamp. As you walk, the distorted mirrors shatter, one by one, until only a great clear mirror remains. You stand before it, and you see not the fragments of yourself scattered in others' projections, but your whole being, light and shadow together, integrated. And as you look, the mirror dissolves, for you no longer need it. You are your own reflection, your own source of light. You wake from the dream, and you know you are free. This, then, is the calling I place before you, to step out of the game, to refuse the chains, to walk into the alchemy of your own becoming. The world needs empaths who are awake, not enslaved. The world needs compassion, rooted in wholeness, not in self-erasure. The world needs your light, steady and sovereign. And so I ask you, will you turn the game into freedom? Will you claim the fire that has always been yours? Will you rise like the phoenix into the fullness of your own being? The choice is yours, always. The narcissist will play their game as long as you allow it, but you are no longer bound to play. You can walk away, not in bitterness, but in truth. And when you do, you will discover that the freedom you thought was beyond you has always lived within you, waiting for this very moment. So stand in your wholeness, stand in your light, stand in the sacred fire of your soul, and know with every breath that no one can take from you what is already yours.